Okay, now, we were talking about survey questions when we left off yesterday, but prior to that, we were talking about study methods. So the study methods were observational, and then controlled experiment, that's the two groups, and then surveys just to ask a question or maybe a couple questions of somebody. So this is a little summary here. So if you have a poorly designed study, so if you don't do a good job, maybe you don't ask your survey questions in an unbiased way, something like that. If you have a poorly designed study, that can result in unreliable statistics. I'm just going to write stats because I don't think I could fit that on that line. Anyway, okay, so if you don't design your study well, it may be that collecting the data that you're going to collect is like a waste of your time, is basically what this is going to say. So if you do have a well-designed study, though, you can assume results represent the entire population, even if you are just using a sample of that population. So remember, population's the whole group, sample is part of that group. So if you have a well-designed study, you can use that data, and that data can be used to make general conclusions, or they call these also inferences. I feel like I just spelled that wrong, forgive. No, I didn't. Inferences about the population. So an inference is just making a conclusion. That's all that is. So what we're going to go through here, I'm just going to give you a scenario, and we're going to see if we can identify the sampling method, which would be we did like convenient, self-select, systematic, and then random. So see if we can identify the sampling method and then also the study that's being done in this example. So this one says, professors conducting research about the effects of ice cream on a person's dream activities. Seems like a completely normal thing to do. Okay, the professor divides one of her classes, which is 30 students, randomly into two groups. Over a period of 8 weeks, one group eats ice cream before going to sleep, the other does not. Students all wear monitoring devices while sleeping, and a research team collects the monitoring devices and records the dream activity of each student. Okay, can you tell from this, like, what's the sampling method? What do you think? Yeah, she's just using one of her classes. Convenience. And then what study method is she using here? So we're going to split the class into two groups. One group's going to eat ice cream, one group's not, and then we're going to compare the results from these monitoring devices. Yeah, this one's actually, okay, whenever you're going to split them into two groups and do one thing to one group and not do anything to the other group, that's going to be the controlled experiment. So she'll have people eat ice cream and then have the other group not eat ice cream. The group that would not eat ice cream would be the control group, and then she can compare the activity. Okay, now, hopefully those two things should be the same for everybody, but maybe your reason for what we're going to write down next, it could be different for everybody and it could be correct for everybody. So, would you use the data and the statistics that they would collect from this experiment? Like, do you think this is a well-designed way to study this? It is a weird experiment, I would agree with that. Like, what would maybe cause you to say, no, I better not make any general conclusions about the population as a whole? Small sample, right? Anything else bother you about it that maybe we wouldn't make a general conclusion about the whole population? Peyton, what do you think? That's true. Okay, these are college students. You could argue kind of like not going to get enough sleep maybe. Also, I would say, just along those lines, this is horribly underrepresenting people in other age categories. It's just these college students. We didn't grab, somebody's grandma and somebody's baby sister. Hopefully you wouldn't do that to a baby, but yeah. It's just one class, like just the small sample. It's just one class. It's 30 people. So I'm not saying you would totally disregard the whatever results that they would find here, but it's really not, it's not enough information to make a conclusion for the general population. It's usually probably not. It's probably bad for your health. Okay. Now this one's I think this one's kind of tricky. So this one says students in a science class record the height of bean plants as they grow. This is a weird one for, what sampling method do you think I'm using here? The study method is definitely observational, because we're just going to observe the height of these plants. Anybody have any idea what category the sampling method would be here? Thank you, ma'am. Well, the bean plants aren't volunteering, so I think that this is convenience here, because they just have didn't you guys do this in 3rd grade? You had to plant a bean plant? Yeah, okay. You're not going out into the field, though, and measuring every bean plant in some field somewhere. This is in your classroom in a cup, probably sitting in the windowsill. Okay. Now, do you think this would be good data to use? You're measuring the height of bean plants as they grow. Could you make a conclusion for all bean plants if you were doing this? It depends. Okay, I would say, yeah, it has some conditions. I would say this could be decent for the area of the experiment. Like, if you wanted to say, okay, we think bean plants are going to grow like this in Indiana or something, maybe you could argue that. Things I would say maybe against that, these are probably inside, where bean plants would probably be outside in a normal scenario. And not good for, is this bean plant Indiana? Is this bean plant in Wyoming? It would grow differently. So if you were just talking about a certain area, maybe this is good. This is inside versus outside. I could maybe argue that. I would not say throw this out. I think this would be probably decent data, but there's some arguments there where you might not use this. Okay. This one says student council members ask every 10th student in the lunch line if they like the cafeteria food. The sampling method here, anytime it says like every 5th, every 10th, every whatever, it doesn't have to be a specific number. This one says every 10th. This is that systematic. Okay, so every 10th person in lunch line, they're going to ask them if they like the food. What kind of study am I doing here? This is just a survey. You're just asking a question. Okay. Now, assuming they're trying to improve probably their own cafeteria. So I would say for the general population of the world, do they like the cafeteria food? No, this would not be a good study. If they're just trying to find for their school, like what kids at their school like this food, do you think this would be good data, a good way to collect it? Peyton, what do you think? Okay, I would say this is pretty good, but she's right. I think this would be pretty good information, because if you're in the lunch line, you probably like the food. But I would say you could have a bias because you are underrepresenting like people who pack or people who don't stand in the lunch line, like they brought food with them or whatever. So I totally misspelled representing there. You're underrepresenting a group of people. But if they're just trying to see if the people in the lunch line actually like the food and asking them a question, this might be a good way to do it, because they could say yes or no. All right, now the last one. Pharmaceutical company asks for volunteers to test a new drug to treat high blood pressure. The volunteers are randomly assigned to 2 groups. One group will receive the new like blood pressure medication. The other group will receive a placebo. If you've never heard of that, it's like a sugar pill, so people will take it. They think they're taking the medication that they're in the study for, but they don't know usually which group they're in. So if they take this sugar pill, it doesn't affect them in any way. And then the researchers monitor the blood pressure of the volunteer for 6 weeks, so then they would compare the two groups. What kind of sampling method am I using here? Self-select, because it tells you they're volunteering. What kind of study method is going on here? Two groups controlled, one's going to get the medication, one's not. So this is a controlled experiment. Is this a study that we would use and make conclusions about the population as a whole? What do you think? Right? Right, okay, so like we don't have enough information here. Like, who is volunteering for this? Is this like their doctor contacted them and said, you have high blood pressure, I think you should volunteer for this study? So maybe people that would actually need the medication are not necessarily the volunteers. So we would need we would need a little bit more information, I feel like, about who the people are. Like, do they actually need blood pressure medication? I would hope so if they're in this experiment, but you don't know. It doesn't say. What else might be maybe not great about this? Yeah. Doesn't say we're doing this with 1,000 people or anything like that. We have no idea what the sample size is. There's not enough. So you could maybe argue this is not enough people. What else might you argue here? The other thing I was just going to maybe bring to your attention just really quick, like, I could maybe argue here this might not be enough time. Right. And sometimes if you start, and I don't know, it just depends. If you've taken a medication before, sometimes it takes, you know, maybe a month or something like that for the medication to actually work in your system and things like that. So, is this enough time? I don't know. Maybe they need to study longer than 6 weeks. And like Mackenzie said, we don't know the long-term effects or anything like that. So all arguments, I don't necessarily think that's bad, but just to kind of think through like what maybe would be wrong with it. And like I said, for a lot of these questions, it's just going to be